Hello friend, how are you? Welcome to Tripan Study Center and highlighting each and every point of it. Let's see what is our topic today. Today we are discussion most important topic here, shock therapy. Shock therapy is here the end of bipolarity, a political science cbse chapter 2a, class 12. This is the most important topic today has doing here. The first of all here, the mean of shock therapy, drawback and sequence. This point is the most important and today discuss in this point. The first of all here, mean of shock therapy. There is shock therapy is important here. Shock therapy was a painful process of transition from to the authoritarian socialist system to be a democratic capitalist system. And this transformation system was influenced by the World Bank and the IMF in the Russia and Central Asia, East Europe, through its various intensity and speed amongst their former Second World and country, but it is a direction and future were quite similar. The next year mean the dissolution of the USSR was correlated with the downfall of communism in the countries which were a member of socialist bloc, and these post-Soviet countries underwent a process of transition from a authoritarian socialist system to be a democratic capitalist system. The modern transition come to the back shock therapy, and it was facilitated by the World Bank and IMF, the Bretton Woods institution. There is a next point here. The next year drawback. This was not a best way to make a transition from the communism to capitalism due to the following drawback here. The drawback is the most important point here. First of all, drawback here, Russia, their large state and control to industrial complex lost about 90% of the industries through the sales to be private, individual and companies. This is the first point here. And the next here, it's a create the largest garage sale in history. The largest garage sale in the history, which leads to virtual disappearance of entire industry for the restricting and was carried out by the market force in place of government awarded policy. This is the most important policy here, and hence industry were under value and sold at a throwaway prices. And the next year, it is a systematically destroy old system of social welfare here. The next point here, the value of rubles, the Russian's currency, and decline dramatically due to the high rate of inflation and real GDP of Russia, and also decline between to the 1989 to 1999. This is the most important period time here. The withdrawal of government subsides, pushing a large section of the society into the poverty, and it is emerged a mafia to start control many economical activity here. There's an important point here. Society into the poverty, and it is emerged mafia to start controlling many economical activities here. And here privatizations lead to be new disparities, which is a divided Russia between the rich and poor people, creating economic inequality. Economical equality. And shock therapy brought around to be a economics and disaster upon their people of entire region. This is the most important drawback here. The next point here, consequence of shock therapy. There's important topics here. Consequence of shock therapy here. Shock therapy is provided to be a real shock for the Soviet economics. The shock therapy proved to be a real shock for the Soviet economic. It is about to be a communist economics and the people of the region. It will lead to their collapse of the state-controlled industry units and high-scale privatizations of the government and enterprises and subsequent outtakings of the state-owned industry, which were called the largest grand scale in the world history. The value of Russia currency ruble declined. The value of Russian currency ruble declined democratically with their soaring rate of inflation pushing people into the poverty. There is an influence of pushing people into poverty. The next point here, the old system of social welfare was pushed to be assessed with their government and withdrawing subsidies here. The next point here, it is a burden there gap between rich and poor. It is a further reinforce their economical divided. This is the most important shock therapy here, drawback, consequence, and what is shock therapy and means also. This is the most important here. Next question arrive here, define the bipolarity. This is the most important here. Bipolarity can be defined as a system of the world order in which the majority of global economics, military, and culture influence is held between two states. That is the most important here. The next three questions here, explain any two reasons for the degradation of the USSR. That is the most important question here. Explain any two reasons for the degradation of the USSR. This is the most important for the exam view here. A factor responsible for the degradation of the Soviet Union here. A 4 point is the most important here. You know that on your screen there is a 4 point here. First of all, factor here responsible the degradation of the Soviet Union. The most important factor for the fall of the Soviet Union was a lack of proper leadership. You know that there's a most important answer here. The most important factor for the fall of the Soviet Union was a lack of proper leadership. And second here, there was a no clear-cut line between two party and government, as where was one political party which was a wielding power. This is also important point here. There was a no clear-cut line between the party and government. No clear-cut line to the party and government, as there was a political party which was the wielding of power. And the next point here, Mikhail Gorbachev's a policy of perestroika and glasnost is provided to the districts for their economical health of the USSR. This is an important point here. Mikhail Gorbachev is a policy. Gorbachev is a policy of perestroika and glasnost is provided with the districts for the economical wealth of the USSR. And the next point here is also important here. Anti-communist forces of the Soviet Union had the support of USA and Western European country. This is most important here. Anti-communist force of Soviet Union had the support of the US and Western European country. And Gorbachev, due to the liberal policy, did not try to uproot these forces. This is a note. Try to uproot these forces here. And no effort was ever made to be created as a socialist human beings and socialist culture. This is the most important question on your screen. There is reason for the degradation of the USSR. 4 question arrive here. This is the most important question here. Is the fourth here. Describe any 4 consequences of degradation of the Soviet Union. This is the most important for the exam view here. Tripan Study Center here. Take a most important question for the exam view. And the 4th question is the most important for the exam view here. Describe any four consequence of deterioration of Soviet Union. This is the most important. You know that consequence is the most important. The consequence of the integrations of Soviet Union were the first point here. This is the disintegration of Soviet Union meet the end of the Cold War. There is a Soviet Union meet to the end of Cold War because the Cold War was the culmination of rivalries between the USA and USSR, and thus Cold War is a confrontation were put to an end. This is the most important consequence first here. There is the end of Cold War. Reason being here, the Cold War was the culminations of rivalries between the USA, USSR and USSR. This is an important first point here. And the second here, the dissolutions of Soviet Union lead to be dramatic change and upheavals in their power of relation which had to implication for the world politics. I repeat again this point here. The dissolution of Soviet Union lead to a dramatic change and upheaval in the powers of relation which had the implication for the world politics. The disintegration left open to the world space to be dominated by the sole superpower is called their USA are to have the dominance of the cerebral power. The consequence is the most important here. The USA is a superpower. The USA here superpower. The world is to be dominated by their solo superpower for USA. This is the most important consequence of disintegration of Soviet Union here. And the next point here, the Bretton Woods institution like the World Bank and International Monetary Fund become active and players in the wake of developmental needs of second world country as they were borrowing money from the World Bank and IMF. You know that this is the most important consequence here. The Bretton Woods institution like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund become active and player in the make of development need of second world country as they are browsing money from the World Bank and IMF. This is the most important point here. And the next year, the world say the emergency of many new countries with their own independent aspiration. This is the most important consequence here. The emergence of many new countries. There are USSR here, degradation and emergence of many new countries here. And the next year, the Baltic state, namely Estonia, Lithuania and Latvia is joined to the European Union and subsequently become a member of NATO. This point is also important. The Baltic state, namely to the Estonia, Lithuania and the Latvia, join the European Union and subsequently become a member of NATO. There is a member of NATO. And sixth point here, undoubtedly there is a significant consequence of measuring away for the USSR was there inaugurations of period of US hegemony. Inauguration of period of US hegemony in their capitalism was pronounced as the winner because socialism has been to dead. There, the socialism has a dead and USA here the hegemony and capitalism is winner. So capitalism is a winner and socialism is a loser. This is the most important consequence of integrations of USSR here. Fifth question arrive here. This is the most important question. There is a most important here. Describe the role of Gorbachev to be reform the Soviet system and effect of this reform on the USSR. This is the most important here. The role of Mikhail Gorbachev to reform the society system and the effect of this reform from the USSR. This is the most important question for the exam view here. Mikhail Gorbachev was the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1985. There's a most important point here. Mikhail Gorbachev was the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1985. He initiated reform to the Soviet system and tried to be normalized a relation with the West, and he also tried to the democratize and reform the Soviet Union. This is the most important here role there is Mikhail Gorbachev as a General Secretary of Communist Party. There is the aim is most important here. The reformer Soviet system was tried to be normalized relation with the West, and he also tried to democratize as a reform the Soviet Union. But first here, some of the reform initiated by the Gorbachev are. The reform is the most important point here. Let's see here Gorbachev as a reforms here. First of all here, he introduced the economics and political reform policy of perestroika, main restrictions, and glasnost is the openness. This is the most important reforms here. He introduced the economic and political reform policy here are two types. Restrictions and glasnost means openness. This is the most important here reform. And second here, he stopped the arm race with the US and by singing apart control over the nuclear weapon. This is the most important effort here. He stopped the arms race with the US by singing this apart from the control over the nuclear weapons. And the next year, he withdrew Soviet troops from the Afghanistan and Eastern Europe. This is the most important point here. He drove there is Soviet troops and from the Afghanistan and Eastern Europe here. The next topic here, the reforms initiated by the Gorbachev had a flowing effects on the USSR. This is the most important here. Reform, there is the most important for Gorbachev, but the reforms had an effect on the USSR. First of all here, common people become impatient to be wearing opponents and distracting of the system faster than this were scheduled in the policy of perestroika and glasnost. This is the most important here. There are common people become impatient to be wearing opponents and distracting of system and faster than this were scheduled. A policy of perestroika and glasnost. And the next year, bureaucrats and the communist is a hardliner did not want to be adopt this policy. This is the most important fact here. Bureaucrats and the communist is a hardliner did not want to be adopt this policy. And they felt there is a power and luxury will be reduced. This is important point here. The effect here. And third point here, as a result, Gorbachev had to be a suffer and subsequently his resign and his comes took place in the 1991 and each with the Communist Party hardliners were on the one side and the stand is a supporter of restrictions on the other. This is the effect for the here reforms of the Gorbachev here. Gorbachev has the resigned and is in 1991. And Communist parties, the hard-nots, were on one side, and the students is the supporter distracting on the other side. This effect for the Gorbachev's reform here. And the next point here, Gorbachev's reform policy is graded up to the nationalist feeling and the desire for the sovereignty within the various republics is including Russia and Baltic Republic. This is the most important here. Gorbachev's reform policy graded up to the nationalist feeling and the desire for the sovereignty with their various republics and include Russia and Baltic republics. And people preferred their capitalist economic over to the centralized economies under which there are suffering. There's a most important last point here. The people preferred their capitalist economies over the centralized economy under which they were suffering. Sixth question here is the most important. There is a what was the Soviet system and assess the feature of Soviet system. This is the most important question here. Know that what was the Soviet system and assess feature of the Soviet system. First of all, what is the Soviet system? According to here, the Soviet system was based on the critiques of capitalism, which declares that a capitalism unavoiding and the leads a never-ending improvement and exploitations of the masses. This is important. The Soviet system was based on the critiques and capitalism, which is a declares that capitalism and unavoidings lead to the never-ending improvement and exploitations of masses. It is stressed that capitalism can never be the equality itself with the mass production for the satisfaction of human needs. This is important for the Soviet system here. The Soviet system was a largely pro-poor in orientation with the social policy and aim at the welfare of the masses. This is important. There is a welfare of the masses. The Soviet system is constituted after the Russian Revolution of 1917. This is important. The Soviet system was constituted after the Russian Revolution of 1917 and the based on equality and plan to economics. This is important. There is a base on equality and plan of economics. And some feature of Soviet system are following. This is important. The some feature of Soviet system here. First of all here, in the Soviet system, the state was accorded an important role. In the Soviet system, the state was accorded an important role. The state was the savior of the masses. And second here, the Soviet system was an outcome of the socialist and doctrine here, which is the seek the create an egalitarian society. This is important. But third point is also is the most important here. The Soviet system as economics was planned and controlled by the state. This is important here. The Soviet system as economics was planned and controlled by the state. And there were no private enterprises or industries. There were no private enterprise and industries. This is important. The next point here, the Soviet political system gave up premises to be a communist party with the no scope for the opposition in politics. Or it was a sign of the authoritarianism. This is most important here. The premises to be a communist party with a no scope for the opposition party in their politics. This is the most important four features of Soviet system here. Next question arrive here. Seventh question is also important. Question here: what were the factors that forced the Gorbachev to be initiated reform in the USSR? What is the factor? There is the force the Gorbachev to the initial reform in the USSR. Is the most important. I have discussed preview question their reform, but here factor. What were the factor that forced the Gorbachev initial reform in the USSR? It's the most important question for here. The factor that forced Gorbachev to initial reform in the Soviet Union were, first of all, here, the most important factor was to keep the USSR well aware the revolution taking place in the field of information and technology in the West. And Gorbachev was well aware of the standard of technology in a USSR. This is the most important factor. There is a reasons for reforms here. The most important factor was to keep their USSR well aware of the revolution and taking place in the field of information and technology in the West. And Gorbachev was the well aware of the standard of technology in the USSR. This is important. And the second here, Gorbachev want to be make USSR an advanced country. This is the most important point here. There is USSR, Gorbachev want to be a make USSR on advanced country which could be catch up with or outpace to the Western country or particularly the USA. It was a step for a democracy. This is the most important point second here. And the next point is also important here. Third, Gorbachev was a liberal in his the outlook. Gorbachev was a liberal in his outlook. He favored to the normalization of ties of the USSR with the rest of the world. And among his top priorities was to be a forget better relation with the Western country. This is the most important here factor. There is a Gorbachev was a liberal his outlook and here a favor to normalization. And here top priority was the for better relation with the Western countries. And the next year, Gorbachev faced the administrative stagnations in the Soviet system. Reason being a lack of democracy coupled with the mounting corruption. The corruption is the most factor affecting for there is a reform here. Gorbachev faced administrative stagnations with the Soviet system. There is lack of democracy. There is a couple with the mounting corruption. And the next year, fifth point here, Gorbachev has drive his motivation for reform in the need to be address the legacy of economics, social and political stagnations, and which took a step in the regimes to the Brezhnev, and they marked the economical decline of the declared 1976 to 1985, and this time challenged the military and political supremacy of the USSR. This is the most important point here. The economical, social, political stagnations which took shape in the regime of Brezhnev, they marked the economical decline. This is a time here 1976 to 85. And this was a challenge in their military and political supremacy of USSR. And the last point, sixth year, a foreign policy complication added by the Soviet Unions, and one there is Afghanistan in 1979, and complete Gorbachev to be disintegrate their Soviet command and so economy there are uses in the era of economical prosperity. This is the most important point here. Foreign policy a complication added by the Soviet Union as involved there Afghanistan in 1979. This is also important. The eighth question here. Examine the Indian as a relation with the former Soviet Union during to the Cold War. The India and the former Soviet Union enjoy a cordial relationship during to the Cold War. The relation between the two was multi-dimension relationship here. First of all, here relation, economical relations during to the Cold Era, India as a public sector and companies were assisted by the Soviet Union. This is the most important point here. Economical relation during to the Cold War era, India as a public sector, companies were assisted by the Soviet Union. And the next point here, it give aid to the technical assistant for the steel plant like Vilai, Bokaro, Visakhapatnam, as well as a machinery plant like Bharat, Heavy Electrical Limited, etc. This is the most important relationship from the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And the next year, third year, apart from this, is the Soviet Union accepted their Indian currency for a trade, and where India was short of foreign exchange. This is the most important relation here. The third point, apart from this, the Soviet Union accepted their India currency for a trade when the India was short and foreign exchange. And the next year, fourth, political relation on the political front, the Soviet Union has supported India in the UN over to the Kashmir issue. This is the most important support here. There is a relation is good. Political relation on the political front, Soviet Union has supported. Soviet Union supported India in the UNA over to Kashmir issue. And the next point here, India got support from the Soviet Union during to the major conflict, especially during the war with the Pakistan in 1971. In this time, the Pakistan supporting by the USA and India supported here a Soviet Union. This is the most important period time here. And the next point here, the Soviet Union on the other hand also got indirectly support from India for its foreign policy. This is the most important point here. And the next point here, the 7 point, defense relation. Defense relation is the most important. Defense relation, India received a military hardware for the Soviet Union when the other country were building part with the military techniques. This is the most important relation here. The defense relation, the India received its military hardware from the Soviet Union, and when other countries were willing to part with the military techniques here and the technology also. And the next point here, culture in the Soviet Union, Hindi film and Indian culture were very popular. This is the most important support here. Culture in the Soviet Union, Hindi film and Indian culture very popular in this country here. And the next and last point here, this has been proved as a many prominent India writer and artist paid a visit to the USSR. This is the most important relation show in this point here. There is a many prominent Indian writer and artist paid a visit to the USSR. This is the most important relation for the India and USSR here. This topic was till this. We will be do their next topic in the next part. If you like it, then please like, share, subscribe and share the video as much as possible. Do not think, subscribe and save in your mobile.